recently I hung out with this guy, and my other male best friend, he was like, are you guys going on a date? And I was like, I don't know. We're hanging out. Like, what makes it a date? Like, it's so awkward.
I was able to start dating again, which was an absolute shit show because I didn't date sober. I was brand new sober. I met my husband and that was it. And then we were just married and off to the races. So dating sober is weird.
Jason LaChance here. Hey, I want to tell you I've got some exciting news on things that I'm doing, and I'd appreciate you following me there. I am going to be producing and sometimes co-hosting a new podcast that's showing to be very successful, and it's in the same wheelhouse. It's called We're Out of Time with Richard Tate.
The We're Out of Time podcast with Richard Tate, featuring two-time NBA champion Lamar Odom.
You were in a coma, right?
For 3 days. They told me I wasn't even going to talk again, let alone walk.
Musician and social media influencer Andrea Russett.
Oh, yeah.
As of today, 2 weeks.
Star of Netflix Tall Girl Ava Michelle.
The next morning, I found him, and
You found him?
I did find him.
Personal stylist Parker Noriega.
These kind of doctors, majority of the time, are yes doctors.
Ken Kraft, the founder of Hope the Mission.
I had my own broken world experience. I lost everything.
On the We're Out of Time podcast with the man who revolutionized addiction treatment, Richard Tate. Subscribe now on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Richard is one of the premier individuals in addiction, treatment, and recovery. And he started the We're Out of Time podcast. I'm producing it. I'm going to be co-hosting. He's had so many amazing guests, celebrities talking about their addiction struggles, recovery, mental health, and so much more. Please give it a follow. The link is in the podcast description, youtube.com/@RichardTate. Or if you're listening to the podcast, search for We're Out of Time, and you'll find the podcast there. And you'll be hearing and seeing me on there, so if you want to remain connected with me, that's the place to do it. Or some of you may know that I do work for PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, a nonprofit helping those and their families through the process of addiction and recovery. And I've included links for all that and the podcast that we do called Don't Hide the Scars down below in the description. And I put my email there as well. I've had so many people reach out through Knockin Doorz Down asking to be connected to services, and that is the best way to get a hold of me, jason@painnonprofit.org. So, the wonderful Rachel Kove here, and my wonderful friend Jo Weatherford, and we are going to dig into more. I've been doing this series kind of called Sober Now What, and I know this kind of came up with you and I, Jo, and Rachel, you're like, sure, I'll jump in here. Boy, that dating and sobriety
What
and
dating?
relationships. Well, that's true. I mean, you're going through, a hard process where a relationship comes to an end. Jo just had it. I've been through a divorce. Some bumps in the road. We're 2.5 years ago. And I don't mean bumps in the road with us, but the external stuff and seeing some stresses of that.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's tough when you're sober, let alone if you're someone you've gone through addiction.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 4 years in this process of being divorced. It's still hard. It's still hard. Yeah. And that's why I was open in the conference today at TJ Woodward's Conscious Recovery event, Emergence. Healing relationships and healing the parts of self that were involved in those relationships. Those moments they hit and you're like, where was this? I was fine. And then now I'm, feeling this again. So, relating it to dating, it is so courageous to start dating again after divorce. It takes, for me, so much courage, because when I give my heart, I am giving my whole heart. And so I get scared. So I think it's good to talk about just that it's really scary. As a very strong woman who has led with being tough was how I survived. When I'm dating, I find myself very much in like my feminine and more relaxed, and it's like more of a surrendered space, which is scary for me.
Sure.
So it's getting used to it. It's like, oh, again. I think that's like, I don't know if you went through this, but it's like, because you said you went through a divorce?
Yep, I sure did. 2 years.
I don't know about you, but for me, it's like, again, I have to start over. Like, I already did this. So there's almost like frustration and also excitement for something new.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, one of the things I've had to be so diligent with is that I am the source of my love. And anytime I forget that and I start putting that responsibility on somebody else and hoping that they'll do it for me, and I'm almost looking for my own love reflected through another individual, that's where it gets messy and I get into trouble. And so I was right in the middle of going through court with my ex, which is 0 stars, don't recommend. And I was so angry, you know, like the rage that I felt, I forgot that I was capable of it because I hadn't felt it since I was using. And I mean, it was just this unbelievable anger. And I'm like, I have to do something to heal this because I cannot survive. And who knows how long this process in court is going to be. And I just can't hold on to this anger. And it really was through a moment. It was so beautiful. My best friend grabbed me like literally by the face, which was a great pattern interrupt because I didn't expect to be literally grabbed. And he looked at me and he's like, he is not the source of your love. He is not the source of your wealth or your financial security. He is not the source of it. And it was something about that moment, just a God moment, it landed. And it really allowed me to, for the most part, forgive and just be okay and accept the process. And that's the thing. Forgiveness, we think it's like, oh, it's okay, or I love you, or any of that. Like, the root of forgiveness is just really acceptance. And the moment that I can anchor into my power and accept what you're doing, the better. And that, once I went through that, I was able to start dating again, which was an absolute shit show because I didn't date sober. I was brand new sober. I met my husband and that was it. And then we were just married and off to the races. So dating sober is weird.
So weird.
You don't realize what a crutch it is. If we go out and have 10 glasses of wine, like it's a way different experience than just being in yourself. Like, okay, let's do this. Let's get to know each other.
Yeah.
I think it's so awkward.
It is.
It's so awkward. Like I recently I hung out with this guy and my other male best friend, he was like, are you guys going on a date? And I was like, I don't know. We're hanging out. Like, what makes it a date? Like, it's so awkward. And I'm just...
Well, it's weird because it's like, look, I want to get to know you, but a part of my brain's kind of like, yeah, I could see getting naked with you at some point, right? But now, like in sobriety, I don't know about me, you know, like discretion wasn't a part of it. It was like, who the hell's apartment is this? Oh shit, you know, it's so and so, you know. So that was like a big part. I remember telling Joe about this. Like, I eventually got to a point where it was like, women were pushing my boundaries, like, and I would state it. And why the relationship I'm in now worked was like, look, this is how like it is for me. Like, if it doesn't work, then, you know, you can go. And it was like, no, I'm down with that. So it's really hard to do that because I love to be loved. You know, it's that part of me that I've had to work on.
Yeah. Well, I loved what you said about this person's not the source of your love. I like to live and live that way as well. And I also think it's this like constant redirect. Yeah. Because the mind and the ego will come in and be like, but I do feel better when he validates me.
Sure. Well, don't you think that's because, I mean, by nature with men and women, and tell me if this doesn't resonate with you, but I want to be dependable so that she can depend upon me. But at the same time, I also want to be able to have my independence to go and do the things I need to do to be dependable.
Yeah. I think that's where like interdependence comes into play. You know, do I have a relationship to myself? Is there a self? I always tell people when I'm running groups, a couple is an individual and an individual creating a relationship. So I'm not the relationship. I'm not the sex. I'm not this person. I can live without them. I was fine before them. I would be fine after them. And then there is, I think, our wounded parts that get activated sometimes, where we used to think that our source of love came, for me, it was a man. And those parts can get kicked in sometimes if I get rejected or if the person doesn't text. It usually happens for me the most when I don't get texted back. That's when it comes up the most with me. And I hear the inner dialogue. It's going, you're not good enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not sexy enough. Like, you're not skinny enough. You're too masculine. Like, you're too forward. You're too honest. You're too vulnerable. It's like, so I think, I don't even remember how we got to this place, but it's just it all of it's hard and beautiful at the same time. But I do think at the core, it has to be relationship with self and God first. And for me, God is a higher power and love. Like, it has to start with that first, or I will really buy into the illusion that this person holds my worth.
Right.
I just know myself too well. I will make sex my higher power. I'll make this person's opinion of me my higher power. And then I'll lose myself in that. And I can't afford to lose myself.
Yeah.
That's something I learned through a recent heartbreak. I had done all the codependency work. It's like I teach people this stuff, and I was pretty sure I don't want to say mastered it. I'm humbled enough to know that that's never the case, but I thought I was a lot further along than I was. And when this relationship ended, my nervous system went offline. Like, I just truly internally snapped. And it was a process to put myself back together. And moving forward, I will always ask myself the question, if this went away, would I be okay? Because I think those internal gauges, and testing, like, am I outsourcing my power? Do I have me? And you use the word discernment, like self-trust, all of that. For me to get into a relationship where I love again, because I'm the same, I love big, and I don't know how to do it any other way. It's like, it is just massive. I will always check in, do I have me? And as long as that's a yes, then I will move forward. But I didn't know what I didn't know. And it really caught me by surprise. And it was an unbelievable learning experience to just be like, oh, I got it. I don't got it. Yeah.
Knockin Doorz Down by Carlos Vieira. Now available wherever you get audiobooks.
I wasn't done partying, and I didn't want the binge to end. I think I knew that when I finally got home, I'd have to face what I had done, and I wasn't ready to do that. Being responsible for my actions wasn't something I was looking forward to. I had abandoned my wife and baby, my family, and my business. I wanted to avoid the shame of returning to what I had left behind. Even though I was not yet going home, I wasn't sure I had enough resources to continue the binge.
Click the link in the podcast description to find out more.
The We're Out of Time podcast with Richard Tate, featuring two-time NBA champion Lamar Odom.
You were in a coma, right?
For 3 days. They told me I wasn't even going to talk again, let alone walk.
Musician and social media influencer Andrea Russett.
As of today, 2 weeks.
Star of Netflix Tall Girl Ava Michelle.
The next morning, I found him and
You found him?
I did find him.
Personal stylist Parker Noriega.
These kind of doctors, majority of the time, are yes doctors.
Ken Kraft, the founder of Hope the Mission.
I had my own broken world experience. I lost everything.
On the We're Out of Time podcast with the man who revolutionized addiction treatment, Richard Tate. Subscribe now on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Well, I noticed for me, the shift that really happened was I used to have like that. Like, please love bomb the shit out of me. Like, just, don't. And then it was weird. I don't know when it was, and it wasn't like conscious. It just like that went away. Like, and the first incidents I can think of, and sorry to be a little graphic, went on a date with this lady, and I gave her the rules. Like, I'm not going to hold your hand. I'm not going to kiss you goodnight. I will pick you up, open the door. It's like, this is how I am. If you don't want a guy that'll do that, like, I'm not it. Like, I'm not going to waste your time. And at the end, she had some drinks. And I was like, no, it doesn't bother me, because it genuinely didn't. Well, but then her behavior when she got home after I didn't do those things that she thought all of a sudden she could violate, that she had enough stroke to violate what I said, and then I'm getting images texted to me, and it's like, I'm going to block your number. I'm sorry. And that for me was like, whoa, that's huge. Because, I love to be just, go ahead, seduce me, please, go ahead, you know? And so it was like a really weird shift that it was like, that part of my nervous system that used to just make everything fire off, it didn't fire off anymore.
Yeah, well, I think it's important in the journey of healing to really acknowledge the small wins. And for me, I have this part that's like, I'm going to be completely different in all areas, right? it never is like that. It's always these small choices that are huge choices, that I'm doing something different in that choice, right? It's, my therapist always says when I get that compulsion to do something, that's an indicator to stop and pause, to stop, take a step back, observe situation, proceed mindfully and consciously, right? Because if I have that compulsion, I'm trying to do something to change something internally that's uncomfortable by texting. And for me, it's usually texting a man, trying to get some type of validation from a man, trying to feel desirable, trying to feel loved or wanted or accepted. I mean, for me, that's been like one of the biggest drugs in my life that I've had to continuously do work on. I'm really proud of myself for the work I've done around it, because who I was back yesterday, you know, I mean, I'm so different because of those small wins that you were just talking about, right? When you were just like, wait a minute, I don't like this behavior. I'm gonna block you, right? Yeah. So like those moments for me where it's like, oh, I'm not gonna respond immediately, right? I'm gonna really ask myself, do I like this person's behavior, or do I just like what they look like? Right? Do I like how I feel around them, or do I just want to be seen with them? Yeah. Right? Do I like how I feel when I leave them? My mom always taught me that. Like, how do you feel when you leave someone? Right? And if the answer is I don't feel good, I need to trust that. I think that a lot of us who have gone through so much trauma, complex trauma, I can speak for myself, like I lost self. So I had to teach myself what honesty was, what gut feelings were, what intuition was. I had to like, I heard this quote one time where it was like, red flags feel like home, right? Yes. I still have to teach myself, like, that's bad behavior. Right. Don't run towards the bad behavior. But I'm the predator to make a bad behavior look gorgeous. Like, you know what I mean? So it's taking those pauses and going, how do you feel in this moment? Do you feel good around this person? Did they respect your boundary? Do I like being around them? And like asking myself the question and then getting okay with what the honest truth is. Yeah. You know?
There's so much good stuff that you just said. I mean, especially with the flags, just, oh yes, that makes me like run full speed towards you. And I heard the funniest thing about love bombing, and it's like, I completely believe you could fall in love with me in 4 hours. So that's the way it works on me, right? So I was thinking about this though a lot, how we talk about men objectifying women a lot, typically for our sexuality. But what I didn't realize is how much I objectified men so much for what you could provide for me. I fell in love with the fantasy of you, and then I hated you for not being it, you know?
Say that.
And that anger of like, you crossed my boundaries, who you really fucking mad at? I didn't honor my boundaries, and you are out here testing me, and I couldn't hold them. Yep. So, you know, now this anger is created, but I'm just going to project it on you instead of just being like, hey, this doesn't work for me. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like when you sent that text, you weren't like yelling, screaming, angry, whatever. It's just like, I'm just going to block you because it just doesn't work. And we energetically are just, we trust ourselves. We spoke our truth. It's not that we don't say what we need and what we're available for and not. It's that we do it with the energy of, I trust myself to hold my own boundaries. Yeah. And it's so difficult to do that.
Well, and for me, the reason it being is, you know, I'm not here to tell anyone how to have a relationship. It's that I know me, and I know what things can manipulate me real fast. I had a lot of relationships where I would try to have conversations about accountability, and then it would just be like, I'm going to just put on something sexy and you're going to totally forget about that. It's like, no, the problem never went away. And now our connection sexually has been when my nervous system is activated. Yeah. So then that's all that arousal was anymore. So then when it was a good situation and could be loving as opposed to just raw, passionate, there was no arousal factor.
That's a huge...
And then I noticed I went out on dates with women, and I know a lot of men don't want to say is like, they were gorgeous, sweet, whatever. It seemed to be leading there. And I'm like, this is doing nothing for me. And then I realized that's my problem. There wasn't anything wrong with them. Not mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, or any of that. Like, this is me. Like, oh my God, I'm not the little boy anymore that was 16 that the wind blows right. And I'm like, ooh, I'm ready to go. It's like, no, there is nothing here that is touching me. And it was like, oh, shit. And then once I knew that, I was screwed. Because now I can't go back. I can't go back.
Yeah, no, I really believe our relationship to romance and partnership is a reflection of where we are at individually. Because I find that whoever I'm really attracted to is showing me how I feel about myself. And again, it's still a process. I'm not perfect. But when I started to really believe that I deserve so much good, I deserve to be loved as much as I'm willing to love myself. I deserve to be accepted. I deserve to have someone show up 100% the way I would show up for someone. It just changed the way I responded to people, as well as changed what I no longer tolerated. Right? And there's still that little girl that's in me, and the little teenager that's in me, that doesn't believe that, right? That will take breadcrumbs because any attention is good, and I'll eat anything, right? As long as I'm getting fed, right? Even if it's a crumb. So for me, that doesn't necessarily mean that part of me goes away. It's just I don't have to let that part, that teenager, that impulsive kid be driving the car. I can go, hey, I know this attention feels so good. I know he's super attractive, right? I know that it feels really good to connect with someone. And also, I want this for you. It's okay to want more. For me, like teaching myself that wanting more and getting more is okay, but that means I have to tolerate the gap. I have to tolerate, for me, it's been about tolerating loneliness and tolerating that space of wanting something, but then having time before I get it. And I will sacrifice, in my past, I will sacrifice what I deserve just so that I don't have to deal with loneliness. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it is a skill. I mean, we know this through recovery of being able to sit with unpleasant emotions. I mean, that was at the core of, so many addictions. I don't want to feel this. Bam, right? I do this thing and now I don't feel it anymore. But I really, that inner child work is so important. And then looking at our relationships and going into our early family patterns as well. Like I grew up in a home where my dad was actually just physically gone a lot and not real emotionally available. So he was pretty absent. And my mom, God bless her, had her own addiction issues. So I was the queen one moment. You're the best thing I've ever seen. I love you so much. You're amazing. And then the next, I hate you. Get out of my face. And then there was no rhyme or reason. And it was this high, low, high, low. And I look at my relationships and I'm recreated that chaos because that is what love feels like to me. It's what's familiar. It's what I know is that it's real intense and high and then drops you off the cliff and then all of a sudden blasts you up.
The
and
push pull.
Again, that's what my nervous system craves, because that is what I knew. And we are organisms and organisms dig homeostasis. And even if it's dysfunctional, they want to stay in what they're familiar with. And so being able to become aware of that and go, yeah, I'm not going to choose this anymore. I don't want to get dropped off a cliff. I don't care how high that is. Yeah. I don't want to fall anymore. So it's not, doesn't need to be this like flat line, but it's got to be a little bit less of a swing.
Yeah.
I love that you said that. God, that was so good. It's so true. Like that's why abused women and men stay with their victims. They're abusers. Why? Because it's familiar and it feels good to stay in what's familiar rather than step into the unknown where it's completely unknown and in unfamiliar territory. Let
alone if you have someone that not only their actions but their words back it up.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been there that one day, oh, you're the greatest thing, and then you're a total piece of shit, and you have someone vomiting all their problems off on you, and then eventually you start to believe it, and you just hand everything over to them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so important to realize how we get addicted to fantasy.
Yes.
Oh.
For me, that's where it's at. I will make someone look so different than what they're actually presenting. And that's whenever that's why it is important to do this work. Like we said this on our podcast that I did with you, your podcast that I did with you. People need to know what they're signing up for when they're getting into relationship. You know, people need to understand it's not just, it's really hard to be in relationship, and you need to have the skills to do it. It shouldn't just be something that, I'm gonna date just because I want to date. It's like, well, why are you dating? Yeah. You're committing yourself, your body, your soul, your spirit to another person in some capacity, right? That means you're getting into relationship with their traumas, their past, their pleasure, their joy, their relationship to sex, their relationship to love, their relationship to receiving, their attachment styles. That's a big deal.
Yeah. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
And
you know?
do you think, as someone that, you know, an actress and seeing it, and we've seen a nice evolution, I think, more in film. Like, it's funny. I don't know if either of you have done a SLAW, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous.
Oh, are you kidding?
So,
yes.
Yeah. So what's the one movie we can't watch? The Notebook, right?
Oh my God, I love that you just said this. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I wrote a movie with my writing partner, Joey Tabanella. He directed it. I acted in it with him, and we wrote it together. And the movie is called It's Not About the Notebook.
Oh, that's right.
Beautiful.
That's right.
And it's about a couple's marriage who falls apart due to the wife's addiction to the movie The Notebook. And he is never going to be Ryan Gosling. And she just wants him to be Ryan Gosling. And she's like, I just want you to see me. And he's like, I don't know what that means. You know? And he's like, this movie's written by the devil. It's written by devil people. You know what I mean? And it's like this idea of just like, we're so addicted to this idea of like passion and romance all the time. And whilst I do believe that if you are in true sacred conscious partnership, I actually really believe you can maintain that passion.
Sure.
I really believe, but you have to also be creative, and you have to be present. You
Willing
have
to redefine it.
Redefine it, but also like you have to do your work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, when people are like, oh, well, he changed, it's like, we should be changing, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's hard when you think about, like, let's take love bombing, for example, because we went there already. And it's like, we want to believe in the experience of just feeling so captivated and enthralled with someone, right? And I actually do believe that love like that can exist. So then where's the line, right? Where's the line of fantasy? Like, this is going to end up in a dumpster fire, like awful, you know, burnout.
I just love that saying.
Yeah. Or do we look in it? And I think for me, it's compliments must be earned. And that is one of the things that I've really tried to like anchor myself into, is because how do you know if you're being love bombed, right? And it's like, if you don't deserve that compliment, if you haven't earned it yet, that's when you know you're going into fantasy land. And we just have to be so present. And we know all the great spiritual teachers, you know, that's what they're teaching us all the time, is be here now, be in yourself, be able to hold the both and. The Notebook fantasy love, and then the real dirty, messy reality of humans, which is a lot of times we suck. And so how do I be with both of those and like really be with what is in the moment? And I think it's beautiful. And I love that you mentioned intention, because if we are dating without that deep sense of intention and purpose, we will get lost, and we'll also get lost by the things that drive us. Like, oh, what was my early family pattern? Or like Freud's mastery concept, that we will recreate unpleasant, painful experiences with the goal that we're going to master them, but we don't. We know how that happens. It's like, oh, my dad was emotionally unavailable, so I'm going to find somebody unemotionally available, but this time I'll make him love me so that that doesn't hurt anymore. And it doesn't work. And we re-wound ourselves. We re-wound our inner child. We completely break trust. So we've got to just really be honest. What are we doing? What is our responsibility to ourselves and to others? And then what's the point of it?
Yeah. God, that was so good. I love that you said that like compliments should be earned. I remember in my recent, I don't even know if you call it dating, but I had this moment where I went to I said to myself, I went and hung out with this person, and I said, am I impressed by this behavior? Like just the fact that I answered that, right? The fact that I asked myself, like, am I impressed by this? Because I want to be impressed. Like, I want to be impressed, and I wasn't. And it was such a new moment of like, whoa, I get to be impressed. I get to have choices. I don't just have to be going out with people just because they're attractive. Like, what do you bring to the table? And I think my son is my biggest motivator because of what I will allow into my space and what I won't, because I will never do what I've seen a lot of parents do, which is they'll be dating constantly, and then they'll introduce their kid to every single person that they're dating. And it's so unfair to the kid. And so I have this rule that I won't introduce my kid to someone unless I've been with them for a year and I know them really well. And I know what they're signing up for. What are you committed to? How is your relationship to repair? What's your communication? Like, how do you communicate? You know, what is your relationship to sex? Like, a lot of people don't even know how to answer that question.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much shame around it. And I think sex is the greatest thing ever. And a lot of people can't even have a conversation about it. It's like one of the most shamed topics in our culture.
Didn't we talk about that? That you shouldn't be doing anything you can't have a conversation about.
Yes, and that you can't have a conversation sober about, which again, to bring it to that sober dating, you know what I mean? It's
Right.
like there's a lot of people that feel, and I don't want to, I'm going to be careful with saying this because I don't want to sound judgmental, but it's like when we are under the influence or we've got that crutch and we think we're speaking our truth, you know, it's an illusion. It's like what you can say when you're totally present and you're in it. And even if people are watching or not watching, you know, that is your truth. And we get so swayed by public opinion, what our followers going to think, or what is this person I'm trying to impress going to think? I mean, still even parents, like I still have that thought sometimes, like, what would my mother think? We're all guilty of it to some degree, right? But like, how do we just keep, again, making it about us and holding our truth? And so you take it to something like sex, which, I mean, for me, I was in the adult industry for a brief time. And I was so ashamed of that coming out. I was so scared. I mean, I became a professor. I run a business. I was like, oh my God, if anybody ever finds out about this, my life is over. So of course, what's the first thing my ex does when we get divorced? He tells everyone, like literally shoots it out. But you know what was the coolest thing? Is I thought my life would be over. And you know what happened? Nothing. Nobody cared. You know, as a matter of fact, people are like, wow, I can't even believe that's a part of you. To know you now, that doesn't even make any sense. I can't believe that. Yeah. Or like, that's awesome. Yeah. You know? So it was this thing that I was so afraid of. And then this dude set me free in so many ways trying to hurt me. And it was the best gift ever. But again, like when we embody our sexuality, then it's not messy anymore. Like I was just having a conversation with somebody about the Dakini temples, right?
The what?
So it's the Dakini temples.
Okay.
And it's this really cool concept. And I'm not an expert in this. So if you are listening and I screw it up, I apologize. But it was a basic idea of men would go to war. They would see the worst of humanity. They would kill people. They would be covered in blood. They would literally go be warriors. Now they're supposed to come back to their families. Good luck with that. So they would go to these temples and it was women and it was through sex, but it was through nurturing, and they would clean them and they would hold them and they would let them drop back into their hearts and then they would go back to their family. So think about the way we look at sex work now. And you know, if you've been to a brothel, if you know the low vibrational energy, like we've made everything dirty. You know, that really, when I hear that story, I'm like, that's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. And so even with sex, it comes down to reverence. Yeah. You know, and it's like we can take anything and make it beautiful, or we can absolutely disgust it, you know?
It's so true. I love that you're talking about this. It's one of my most favorite subjects to talk about. I mean, I think too, like, but how do I say this? I really think people's relationship to their sexuality is one of the most important things to cultivate a relationship to. Because if we don't get into control with it, that's where rape occurs. That's where sexual molestation occurs. That's where cheating occurs, right? Yeah. That's where affairs happen. And I'm really not judging. I understand. However, if we keep shaming this subject in our culture and not having open conversations about it, then we end up doing things that we regret. Then we end up hurting people, hurting loved ones, hurting children. When really it's a subject, it's the most pleasurable thing on the planet to have sex, right? And it's good, right? And yet people are, oh my gosh, she said sex. She said masturbation. Oh my God, she has a dildo. Like, and I'm like, and I think for me, like, I'm so hopeful that can change, where we can learn to have sex conscious conversations, and where it doesn't have to be this forbidden thing. And like, I was just talking about that with a friend this morning, like why sex workers get so much shit and shame, where it's like, that's how women were able to make money back in the day. There was no other option. And now we shame people for doing that. And I was talking about to someone the other day about like strippers and how they're so shamed. And I'm like, fascinating that they're so shamed, yet people are going to watch strippers
There's
strip.
more watching than there
right?
are.
And then if you go and talk to those people, they have it's hard to get to that point in life where you choose to become a stripper, right? Yeah. They have stories too. So I don't know how this got to here, but I just think that it's like, again, we have to open up this conversation. That's why I think podcasts are so incredible. It's like we can talk about these things that a lot of people in our culture are very uncomfortable talking about. But if they listen to it and they go, okay, we can talk about this, and it might be a little weird, but maybe it's not, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Well,
you know?
it was really fascinating. So the church that we go to, the pastor even like, hey, this is going to be sexual, just so everybody knows. He made it clear, and he goes, because if you've missed it in the Bible, there's a lot about it. There's a lot about it.
And I don't know that.
Yeah.
We never heard about that.
Yeah. And he goes, and the main reason, and he's covering the Genesis the whole year. So, but he's like, the statistical fact is that if I'm not willing to have a conversation here before you in this gift from God that we all have, and we're open about it, he goes, then why is the vast majority of the pornographic users label themselves as Christian men?
It's unbelievable.
And a good amount that are Christian women now. Because clearly you're not talking about it. You're just like, it's this dirty thing that I have these thoughts, these feelings whatsoever, and I'm going to just go over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we push it underground, and that's what gets scary. I mean, it's fascinating to me. I do like a lot of the conversation around porn addiction now, because it takes the morality out of it, and it talks about the reality, which is this. That level of dopamine needs to be earned. Just like compliments need to be earned.
Love that.
Like, you think about it, if you know, we were going to meet, then you would have to court me, you know, theoretically. Yeah. Like, you would have to show up. You would have to impress me. We would spend time together. I would get to know you. You would get to know me. And then maybe.
And let alone that for men, you know, that with the pornography, you know, man goes, masturbates to porn. Sure, we get all these hits, but we also, at the fall of that, get a huge estrogen boost.
Yes. Because you didn't earn it.
Because we didn't earn it. And so, like, in the courtship process, or even, I mean, you know, like, we get busy. You don't have time all the time. So that sexual energy is able to be built up too. And that's important for a man's, not only their libido, but just that energy. It needs to be built up. You know, it can't just be this thing all the time. Take it from a guy that it was a chronic thing. Yeah. Like, that came before booze and drugs ever did.
Well, I think men get a lot of attention around porn. It is huge for women too.
Oh yeah,
huge for women. The amount of clients I've had that, I mean, I did a group recently, and I asked the clients, what is something that you are afraid other people will judge you about? And she said, it was a woman, and she said, I'm afraid people will judge me about my porn addiction. And not everyone, but people, all types of people have a proclivity, I think, to watch porn because it's I don't know, it arouses someone, right? But I think where it gets dangerous is the addiction to it, right? Like you were talking about, it's not good to have such high spikes of dopamine, right? And then I see what happens is that people, they go to porn rather than their relationship. And rather than creating sex with their partner, right? So, like everything, I think it's a dance and it's a balance. I'm not saying it's bad or good. I think everything is about what is your relationship to this person, place, thing, or thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think how we get conscious is by asking ourselves these questions. You know, why am I watching porn today? What am I getting from it? Is it okay to have arousal? Sure. Okay, watch the porn and see what happens. Okay, now what happens? Oh, I feel dirty.
Right.
Guilt. I've heard a lot of guilt.
Yeah.
I know I felt guilt. It wasn't shame, it was guilt.
Yeah.
Which was all, like, okay, I don't feel shameful, but I feel guilty. What am I feeling guilty about?
Yeah.
Like that I've still tried to figure out.
I had a lot of shame growing up with masturbation.
Sure.
You know, and again, I think it's even awkward talking about now And I'm like, what? Like, if we can make these things not awkward, right? I think this is how we can create a different culture, right? It's only awkward because people don't really talk about it. Yeah, and I'm not gonna go publicly tell you my fantasies, right? I don't need to do that. But I read this book because, you know, my kid asked me about sex at 5 years old, right? And no one talked about it in my home growing up, ever, right? So what happens if no one talks about it? You go find out on porn sites, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if we can have really good conversations that are positive and healthy and loving, I think it takes away the awkwardness, you know? And I remember I ran a group one time, and predominantly it was actually an entire group of men, which was really fascinating. And the topic was sex and porn. And they all said to me, I wish my parents did not make sex such an uncomfortable conversation or topic growing up. They were so relieved to be talking about this, especially in front of a woman. You know, they didn't want to be seen as bad or negative. And I think, like, so many men feel so much shame for this whole porn thing. But it's like, how are we going to change that? I don't know. I mean, how do you think we change it?
Well, I mean, I think too, it's like going into, what does this do for me? And for a lot of men and women, it's a way to relieve anxiety. You know, I do think around the porn conversation, I just want to say one thing that's kind of a caveat, like just a side piece of information just to tuck in your back pocket. For me, one of the things that can become really dangerous with porn that I think we need to talk about more is if I'm getting my arousal from watching people have sex, it can very much disrupt my ability to have pleasure my own within myself. And so it's something to just keep in mind, and it feels appropriate to share that, you know, because if I train my brain to get that sexual stimulation from watching other people, it can actually really take away from my own ability to have intimacy with my partner. And so that is something to watch. It's literally just, that's what we train our brain to do. If I'm sexually aroused all the time by this external source, then with my person, I have to be playing something in my mind because it's the only way I can associate with sex.
Yeah.
And
that's a fact.
I guarantee it. We know it. Any of us that watch porn and have sex, we know that we start playing the movie screen on the inside of our brain, and then you're here human to human, skin to skin, you know, and there's a learning curve. And so we need to be mindful. Again, it's not about right or wrong, but it's about what are the consequences. And if you truly desire deep intimacy, we need to be very mindful of things that can rob us of that joy. And so it's about holding, I think, that in the back of our brains. But I have a friend that is phenomenal. He's an amazing podcaster. I don't know if he's talked about this publicly, so I'm not going to say who it is. But he was addicted to porn. And the way he got off of it was this. So this is, I think it's brilliant. He titrated, you know? So instead of just going cold turkey, he would only allow himself to watch one woman. So he only watched porn with this one porn star. But he could watch whatever video as long as it was her. And then he went to, I'm only going to look at Instagram. And so women are obviously very sexualized, but they're closed. You know, their clothes are on and they're not actually having sex with other people. So I'm going to allow myself those fantasies. So he did that for a while and just kind of let himself recalibrate until he finally would allow himself to only look at one specific like fitness model or something and fantasize about her, and then finally was off of it. And I think that that's really smart. Like to me, when you say, how do we quit? Honestly, I have no fucking idea, but I thought that was a pretty good way to do it, you know?
Well, my buddy Frank Rich, who he does have a podcast, and that's solely what he works with men is, he's like, you know, taking back, you know. And the thing that I see that he struggles with some people is like, masculinity and toxicity have been just sandwiched together, and it's unfortunate because it's not like my view. Toxic people are toxic people, you know. Matter of fact, some of the masculine quote unquote sides of my thing is some of the best work I've ever done in my life, you know. But he does that kind of approach. He's like, you know, we're gonna taper down, and we're gonna start replacing it with things that are going to really get that testosterone going. You know, like for me, he's like, when we had a conversation, you know, what do you do outside? Well, sometimes I get the chainsaw out and trim the trees. More of that. More of those things. Do you lift weights? No, you better start lifting weights again, or calisthenics, whatever it is. Those kind of things that we get that different feel, because eventually it'll become, just like with us with drugs and alcohol, very unappealing. And it does hit that point, and it's still a struggle for me at times where it's like the anxiety spikes or the things of the past come up, and I'm like, okay, and I've got to do what I did with booze. I got to reach out to someone and have a conversation, get a hold of another man that struggled, or we've had conversations where it's not necessarily surrounding out, but those feelings that eventually lead to that action.
Yeah, and I think the solution usually is talking about it. I think that honestly, the subject of porn disrupts marriages a lot.
Tremendous.
And it saddens me because it means that there's hiding with one person, right? Some person feels so much shame that they feel like they have to hide this. Yeah. And I think to myself, well, what if the other partner was curious about it? Instead of saying like, you're cheating on me, or, you're fucked up, or how do you do this? What if you become curious in your partner and say, well, what are you getting from this, right? What is it about this scene that turns you on? What if we didn't see it as bad? What if some partners included it in their sex life? What would happen? And I think I think that when we make something so shameful, it increases the dopamine so much more. I mean, the high is how many people say that when they're in active drug addiction, it's like the whole process of getting high is almost better than getting high, because it's like you're hiding or manipulating, you're getting away with things. It's like, oh, I'm smarter than you. Ooh, it's like there's such a rush from that, right? Yeah. And I think that once you kind of decrease the shame and you openly talk about it with someone, I think it takes away the rush, and it makes it not as exciting, right? And then I think it gives you that pause of like, okay, my partner loves me still. He or she is staying. Why am I doing this? Yeah. Right? Maybe in that moment I can just go, hey, I'm going to go up to my partner and say like what I'm wanting right now. What in this moment I'm craving. And this is what I was hoping to get from this video, but I'm going to openly share it with you. This is the fantasy I was wanting to watch. Can we talk about it? And that creates intimacy.
Yeah. Well, and, I know for me, a lot of it was control factor, because so much was out of control. Because it started for me in childhood. Yeah. Like that was literally my first drug. And when you talk about it, makes me think of the last time I slipped was kids weren't with me, convenience stores less than a mile from my house, and I walk in and I'm shaking, and I open the case with the beer and I grab that big beer, and all of a sudden, same kind of thing, same reaction.
It is.
And I think too, that idea that our triggers are beautiful opportunities for exploration. And I'm by no means saying that somebody should be okay with somebody else's behavior and just like dismiss it. If that is really painful for you, that your partner is watching porn, then that's, there's an honoring that comes to that, right? And that needs to be just as big of the conversation. And I know for me, because this was part of my marriage, my husband was, I'm talking hours a day, addicted to porn. And so we went through this a lot. And I, being a mental health professional, I had all the quote unquote tools. But at the end of the day, I really had to sit with myself and go, what is this bringing up in me that is cutting me off from love? Because I was, at some point, I was flooded with the feeling of I'm not enough. And that triggered all my abandonment wounds. And that's really what it came down to. He would do this thing, and then I felt I wasn't worthy, And so it was great for me because it forced me to go inward and deal with a lot of that unworthiness that truly had nothing to do with his behavior. That was just the mirror for what was already inside me. And I love that Eckhart Tolle quote, which is, relationships don't cause pain and sadness, they simply expose the pain and sadness within you. Because the reality is no, I'm not okay with my husband watching porn 2 hours a day, but it was the energy in my delivery of the conversation around that, which was, I didn't trust that I was enough. So I came at him like, you have to change your behavior because I can't deal with this feeling of not enoughness. And so that became the dynamic, instead of I'm going to heal the part of me that doesn't believe I'm enough, and then we can revisit you and what you're doing about your shit. You know what I mean? So it's about, again, like, how do we just do this in a way that honors it all? And it's not about shaming, and it's not about cutting off, but it's like really going in. And, you know, people love me or hate me because I can come off a little bit like, people will say victim blaming, and it's not that at all. It's, I want you in your power. Everything I say is to help elicit that power within you. And the second that we are destroyed over something that somebody else is doing, you're out of your power, 100%. And it's like, I don't want any woman to ever feel that, you know, because that behavior is not about your unworthiness, ever. It's never about you. I mean, Megan Fox, to me, is like the hottest chick on the planet.
So
got
hot.
cheated on. Yeah, like I'm obsessed with her, right? It doesn't matter. All the most beautiful women, you know, and it's a horrible saying, but it's like, show me the most gorgeous girl on the planet and I'll show you a guy who's sick of sleeping with her, right? I mean, it's...
Tommy Lee even wrote a song where in the lyric it says, Tommy got tired of fucking Pamela.
Yes,
It's
you
like,
know? It has
sorry.
nothing to do with your worth.
Yeah.
Although I do think, again, I think we've become such a culture of hypocrisy.
Sure.
Because if a man watches a lot of porn, he's sick and gross and something's wrong with him. But if a woman watches a lot of porn, she's hot.
Right.
She's got a high sex drive.
Well,
Yes.
And what about
So-
on that, like a situation of like, oh my God, that chick, she's wild. She was like naked out in public. Well, it's like, oh, it's a woman, but a guy does it. You're getting fucking arrested and you
Yeah.
got a record.
Such a double standard.
There's such a double standard.
Well, and another one that was interesting that when you were talking, Joe, made me think of it was I had a conversation with a guy that his girlfriend did OnlyFans, but he couldn't look at other OnlyFans accounts.
it's so interesting.
I'm like, you're a fucking cuck, dude. like she wants all the attention for whatever it is, and it was justified as a no. Like you're getting something else out of it other than financial.
Yeah.
I would think. I don't know. I'm not a woman.
Absolutely.
But I would
that might
think-
be the base of it. But yes, attention is attention.
Yeah, because it's like I'm a great law of attraction here, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think if we can become curious of our sexuality by understanding how we get aroused and why, if we can pause in those moments and become curious of it rather than acting out immediately, I think there's so much to learn about ourselves in those moments. I really do. I mean, sexual energy is creative life force.
Yeah.
You know, but we're so used to, you know, oh, I gotta text her now, right? I gotta jack off. I gotta, like, you know, I gotta hook up with someone now. It's like, but that's the compulsion part of it. Like, the energy is a really powerful energy. And again, I don't like. It's awkward to teach kids about it, right? Why? Because it's been awkward for generations, right? But then we are doing a disservice to kids and teenagers. Because if we can't face why it's awkward, then they're left with all these sensations in their body and they don't know what to do with it. Yeah. And then they go watch shows, right, or porn, where a lot of the time they're learning sex through porn, you know? And, you know, we saw it in that show Euphoria, right? It's like these boys were watching a lot of porn where the sex was really rough, right? And so then they started to model that. And then the girl was like, what are you doing? I don't want to be choked. They think that everything's supposed to look how it does in porn. And it's like, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, so I think if there could be, I think our generation, we have so much cleaning up that we've had to do from generations before us. But I really do think one of the most important things in our society right now, individually, is to heal our relationship to sex, our sexuality, to not make it something shameful. And I know that religion like has played a big part in that. And there's a million reasons of how we've landed in here. But if we can make these conversations more open, not awkward, I think that's a huge solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things right now is so many women cannot orgasm.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a huge deal. And, you know, even thinking about your life and your orgasm, right? So if you're one of those people that as soon as you have one, it's like, let me just get up and leave, right? You can't have multiple ones, or you're just, it's like, that's your capacity to hold pleasure. And it translates into every area of your life. You hit that wall. This is as much I can hold and I got to bounce, you know? So even through our sexuality is our place to expand our capacity to hold pleasure when we really learn to enjoy it and to allow ourselves, you know, we've been talking so much about conditioned responses, like to allow ourselves to now train our brain to feel good in that safe, secure pleasure. Because some of us need to learn to be safe there. You know, if it can feel so uncomfortable to have that moment of intimacy and vulnerability and pleasure, it's like, what a great place to practice, you know, with somebody really safe and beautiful and loving. Like, I don't know. I heard a woman talking about that once, the capacity to hold pleasure as it relates to an orgasm, and it stuck with me. It really landed.
That's so beautiful. And isn't that amazing that like most women can't orgasm? It's sad, you know, it's really sad. And also to the other side, I know that a lot of men feel like they can't get off unless they're watching porn, you know, or they can't get aroused unless they're watching porn. So again, I think this speaks to the fact that we're having an issue in our society, and I can't control a million people, let alone one,
right?
You know, but I can question this stuff myself. And I think, again, that's the power of podcasts, right? It's like, maybe we've said something tonight that makes someone go, what's my relationship to pleasure? You know, a lot of traumatized people have a very difficult time receiving love, joy, pleasure, have a lot of resistance to pleasure, right? And feel safe in disconnected sex, you know. People are always, that's actually kind of one of the themes of our movie, It's Not About the Notebook, is as soon as we get what we want, we're like, ugh.
Yeah.
Right? So like the whole movie is about like, she just wants her man to be vulnerable and cry. And he's like, well, why would I cry? I'm happy. Right. And by the end of the movie, he's crying, and she's like, I want a divorce.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's this idea of like, we just want a man to be there, but as soon as they're there, I don't really know what to do with that. And that has to do with intimacy, right? So there's a lot of layers here, but you know, if we can just start becoming conscious by asking ourselves these questions. And then I think when you're in relationship, you know, and you're dating someone, like, be sensitive to someone's past, you know, be sensitive to what someone is recovering from. And that, you know, I don't think sex should be taken lightly. I think it's a really powerful thing. It's a beautiful healing experience for people. And that's why I think we should be in control of where we invest our sexual energy. I don't like the word should, because sometimes it's like a shaming word. But I think if we can develop power of choice over where we're putting our sexual energy, I think it becomes in a very sacred act, sex. And then, you know, when we're not using it for sex, you know, that creative life force, we get to create so much. I mean, that's just what we can do.
I think there was an addict, you know, and maybe it came from 60s, 70s, you know, the hippie movement, you know, free, like, as if it's unconsequential.
Yeah.
Like, sex has hurt me.
Yeah.
Like, it's hurt me.
Oh, yeah.
I've
me
had
too.
many beautiful pleasures. I was actually a guy, like I always say it, we did it right. We talked about it. We planned it. And even the last time I talked to her, I was like, hey, you know, and she's like, it's the most wonderful thing. All my friends, that they're like, I just want to get it out of the way or whatever, you know? So it's like, I had times of very beautiful things, and I have a beautiful partner now. But boy, I can't think of a single thing in my life that hurt me more.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Same.
I love this conversation, because the pendulum always swings so far to the other side, you know. And I think with sex, especially if it's so repressed and shamed, you know, what is the equal and opposite reaction, which is, you know, just as many people as often, it's no big deal, sexual liberation. And I really feel like there's so much beauty in the middle, which is not repressing it, but like being very intentional. And also know your gift of your body is one of the most precious things you could ever give to anyone, you know? And I'm not saying there needs to be rules around it, you know, like you have to wait X amount of time before this, that, or the other. But I do think it's like, no, when you know your worth, when you love your body, when you honor yourself, who you choose to entangle with matters. And what is your intention? You know, like even with dating, right? And going to testosterone and the entire thing. I didn't realize that vasopressin was such a big deal until I heard this broken down. So if you are dating a man and you want there to be longevity, the reason to wait comes down to chemicals. So if you sleep with a guy right away, his vasopressin, which is the bonding chemical for men. For women, it's more the oxytocin, which is now I'm going to bond to you and take care of you. For men, it's that vasopressin. So if you sleep with somebody right away, theirs actually goes down. If you have a connection, they earn it. Then when you finally do have sex, it increases. And now that man is a lot more biologically committed to staying in it, to showing up, to being vulnerable, to being a provider, whatever the conversation is. So, it's just, these are all things that we never get taught.
No, and again, back to dating, it's like, these are the things that I want people to consider before they're dating. And it's like, everyone's been heartbroken. So when we're going on a date with someone, let's consider that. Let's consider that we've all been heartbroken. I think it should be sacred. Like, I don't even know what a date is anymore. Again, it's changing so much in our culture. It's like...
But I think it needs to.
Yeah.
Because I think we are, ironically, to be at this conference, we've come to a greater conscious. Some of us have. But at the same time, we haven't strayed too far from the thing we were thousands of years ago either. It's funny when Jo was, I forget what you said, but it made me think of, oh yeah, when people get set up on a blind date, what's the two things that are asked? How does she look? What does he do for a living?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm loving this conversation, by the way.
Yeah,
so
right?
good.
I know we should. Yeah, I think a shifting of consciousness about that, of understanding at one hand we are these animals and we do have basic things, right? I think it's very true when it comes back to what does he do for a living? What does she look like? It comes back to mating things. We want the dependable, reliable man, and we want the woman that, okay, she's got good genes, because obviously our thing, and I think the closest act we do maybe to God is reproducing, or that's service of humanity, however you want to call it. So I think these are very just ingrained normal things, and it's like, okay, but there's a responsibility to that.
Yeah.
Because no matter what, I know, hey, I'm divorced, but my history is always attached to my kid's mom. And this is the only one I get, as far as I know, So
Yeah.
I think it is just, it's such a powerful, wonderful, beautiful thing, and yet there's simplicity to it at the same time, too.
Yeah. I think it's both, like everything.
Both
Everything
hands.
is so simple and yet so complex. So let's be mindful and considerate of that when we're making our choices. Like, I think about when I go out on dates with men, I have to have a man who's sensitive and considerate. I've been through so much to get to where I am today. I'm such a strong, tough woman, and I'm also so fragile, so sweet, so terrified at the same time. And I live in both realities, right? Yeah. So I think if men and women can learn how to be tender again, right? How to be sweet, how to be considerate, how to like walk someone to the door, I think that old courting thing, like there was something so tender and sweet about it, I remember I was out with a friend one time, and I was getting lunch with him, and we were kind of at a business meeting too, and he stopped the meeting to go inside to grab me a chair and to go get food for me. And I started getting really emotional because I felt so considered in that moment. It was such an act of service to be thought of. So I think we just need to be less selfish, more considerate, think of others more, and be sensitive to the fact that everyone comes with a history of being brokenhearted. It's a tender process. It's scary to go on dates. It's scary. Can we live in that reality? Like, if you're good at it, good for you. But like, also, why are you so good at it? Why are you dating a million people? Like, I just think let's just be more considerate. Our hearts are so sacred. Like, let's be more sensitive to them, and our bodies too.
Yeah, that I love that. And for me, I had an experience recently where I feel like I'm really open. I put myself out there. I'm just, so ready to love. And I had a real moment of intimacy with someone. And it was the first time I felt this block of fear. Mm-hmm. And I'd never consciously had it. I'm sure it's happened all my life. But it was really beautiful to be able to feel that, because it gave me so much respect for not only myself, but all of us on this path of like really looking for love and identifying the love that's already within ourselves. And I just want to say to anybody listening that, if that lives in you too, like I see you and I get it. And I was, I do this all the time. I've dedicated my life to it. And I was like, whoa, that's there. Like, it was really powerful for me. Yeah. And I think too, yet we still continue to move forward. Is like recognizing it, honoring it, learning what we need to from that fear, and then moving in that direction of trusting ourselves to choose those considerate people that are going to show up, you know, and that's the path, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I resonate with you so much because I had that happen to me too, where someone was asking me out and I was like, right. And I'm just like, whoa, what was that? You know, so I think we find out more about ourselves if we're curious of our body's sensations and what's coming up in that moment, right? And also, I think it's important before you start dating to learn how to have learn relational skills.
Yes.
If you just went on a date with someone or you hung out with someone, follow up.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like them, right? I had someone wanting to go out with me like 4 months ago. I wasn't attracted to this person. He was someone from my past. I had no interest in also being a friend. I didn't want to be his friend. I didn't want to have sex with him. I didn't want to do anything with him, right? But I also think it's really sweet when someone is interested in you and kind, and it takes courage to ask someone out, right? So I just responded to this person. I sent him a voice note, and I was like, hey, I'm so appreciative that you want to spend time with me, that you want to see me and grab coffee with me. I'm not in a place right now where I want to have a friendship or go out with you, and it has nothing to do with you. I send you all the love in the world. That's just where I'm at. Like, also, like, we're also living in a culture of fucking ghosting people, which is like become like this like common thing. It's like, doesn't have to be.
Yeah, have the hard conversation.
Just have the hard conversation.
Yeah.
Just say, I'm not interested in you. It's not that hard.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, and two, I just really quickly, I love what you said because it made me think it's like, get back in the ring. So after my last heartbreak, my nervous system goes offline. I spend 30 days alone in my room trying to get myself recentered because I'm like, I'm not leaving this room until I'm better. And I lost 20 pounds and I didn't sleep and it was awful. And I finally got myself back together and I'm like, I am done. So 6 months after no dates, no anything, my therapist finally was like, you've got to get back in the ring. And that really landed to me because I used to own a martial arts school and it's like, yes. So, you know, you can train to hit pads all day long, but until you actually get in the ring and somebody's trying to take your head off, you don't know who you are. Yeah. And so I think there's so much brilliance in pausing and learning the skills and really like anchoring them. And then you got to go put them to use. It's like, go do the scary thing and do it the best that you can and trust that you got you. You know, like, no, it goes back to that thing. Like, if this went away, would I be okay? If this doesn't go well, am I okay? Like, you've got to put yourself in those hard situations again. You know, I hear people tell stories of like, oh, this monk meditated in the forest for 45 years. And it's like, yeah, that's fucking cool. But have you actually been on Hinge? Because let me tell you, that is really, you know, that's terrifying.
I dare that monk to get ghosted.
Yeah, exactly. Try going on a date in LA. You know,
I was out here for 45 freaking days. And
oh my God, it's so true.
Yeah, you know?
Rachel, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way?
Say hello. Ask me on. No, I'm kidding. Probably Instagram.
All right.
At Rachel_Kove. At this very moment.
All right, I'll drop that in the podcast description. Jo, easiest way to get a hold of you?
Instagram at Jo Weatherford or my website, joweatherford.com or recoveryremix.com.
Thank you, ladies. I adore you both.
I adore you. Thank you for being the man in this conversation.
Yes.
Hey,
yes.
I appreciate that.
No,
thank
seriously.
you. As a guy that's been emasculated a lot, thank you. Thank you. You're both amazing. I love this. We're going to have to do this again.
Yes.
Somebody else pick the topic next time.
This one was so perfect.
It was so great.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.